Oxford Botanic Garden is the oldest botanic garden in the UK. It was founded in 1621 by Henry Danvers, 1st Earl of Danby, as a physic garden for teaching the medical students of Oxford about plants used in herbal medicine. And Danby is commemorated in our iconic entrance gate, the Danby Gate, pictured just below. The first 20 or so years after the founding of the Botanic Garden was spent building the garden itself, lifting the level of the land. It sits on a floodplain near the River Cherwell, and that was done with 4,000 wagon loads of muck and dung obtained by the university scavenger. And as well as raising the land over that 20 or so years, a wall was built around the garden with 4 magnificent entrance gates in the style of Renaissance physic gardens within Europe. So it wasn't until the 1640s that the garden was really ready to plant. And to plant the garden, the first keeper, or hortus prefectus, as they were called then, was appointed, and that was Jacob Bobart, a local man who was a great nurseryman and grower of plants. And he came to the garden in 1642 and started planting the medicinal plants, the simples as they were called, for the purpose of the garden. And also he planted some interesting exotic plants that were coming in from different parts of Europe and the rest of the world especially, which fascinated him. And he also grew vegetables and fruits, which he sold to the residents of Oxford to supplement his fairly meagre income. This is what the garden looked like in terms of the plan in the mid to late 1600s, laid out in the conventional style of a Renaissance physic garden with a cruciform arrangement of central paths and 4 segments within the walled garden with its 4 arches. And this print is from a plan of 1675, one of the oldest remaining plans of the garden. Following Bobart the Elder's death, his son, Jacob Bobart the Younger, took over as the keeper of the garden. And he worked closely with a very influential lady, Mary Somerset, Duchess of Beaufort, who had a grand estate with the Duke at Badminton in Gloucester. And they started exchanging plant material and also corresponding with other physic gardens and monastic communities in Europe to obtain seeds of a more exotic nature for growing in her garden at Badminton and also for the garden at Oxford. And in effect, Bobart the Younger was a sort of botanical advisor to Mary Somerset, and their activities in obtaining seed from different parts of Europe are thought to be the basis of the modern way of exchanging seeds between botanic gardens around the world and the inception of index semina that say what species are available from particular gardens. One famous plant that they introduced to the British Isles is the eponymous ragwort of Oxford, the Oxford ragwort, Senecio squalidus, which I have been doing research on for many years now. And the plant is called Oxford ragwort because it was first described by Linnaeus from specimens sent over to him from Oxford. And this plant has a history of beginning its spread from across the UK from the Botanic Garden in Oxford. It started to grow in the walls of the garden and some of the old college buildings before escaping along the railway lines during the Industrial Revolution. Now, interestingly, this plant is a hybrid between 2 species that are native and grow on native to Sicily, Mount Etna in particular, one growing at high altitude, the other growing at low altitude. And it was conventionally thought that the hybrid material that Oxford ragwort is derived from came over as hybrid seed from Mount Etna. However, research by the curator of the Oxford Herbaria, Stephen Harris, identified the fact that both parents of the Oxford ragwort were actually growing in the garden of the Duchess of Beaufort at Badminton, whereas only one species, one parent species, and the hybrid were contained in the herbarium records at Oxford. So we carried out a fairly in-depth genomic analysis of Oxford ragwort, its parents, and various populations in Europe and in Sicily a few years ago, and used Bayesian probability computation combined with large genomic data sets to explore the timing of the hybridization that created Oxford ragwort. And lo and behold, the greatest support came for a more recent origin than would have been predicted had it arisen by hybridization on Mount Etna. So we published a paper in molecular ecology last year, which gave strong support for a hybrid origin in the garden of the Duchess of Beaufort, which is an extraordinary sort of continuation of this story that began with the Duchess and Bobart the Younger importing seed from Sicily. Other famous historical characters that crop up in the garden's history are Robert Morrison, who was the first professor of botany at Oxford and who was largely responsible for creating one of the first, if not the first, systematic taxonomy of plants. Previously, they were classified according to medicinal use. And he also made great use of fruits as a taxonomic character and created the first botanical monograph of a particular group in the Umbelliferae, the carrot family. Then there was Johann de Lennius, who came along later in that century, and he was responsible for creating a famous flora, the Hortus Elphamensis, and also compiling one of the first comprehensive floras of mosses and liverworts and hornworts. John Sibthorpe later collected plants on expeditions to Greece, the Eastern Mediterranean, following in the footsteps of Dioscorides, and that led to two large herbaria, but also famously to the Flora Graeca with Ferdinand Bauer, the botanical artist who accompanied him, which is one of the greatest works of botanical art ever produced and one of the most wonderful floras in the collections here at Oxford. Then moving on, Charles Daubeny was the man who gave the name Botanic Garden to the garden here at Oxford, changing the name from the Physic Garden to represent the fact that the garden was changing in its science and becoming more experimental based. Daubeny, as a chemist, was very keen on finding out more about plant nutrition and the effects of fertilizers, and did many experiments. He also created the first glass houses and grew the newly discovered giant water lily from the Amazon. Then moving on into the 20th century, Cyril Darlington, great geneticist, chromosomal biologist, who discovered the intricacies of crossing over during meiosis and establishing the basis of variation caused by crossing over and exchange of chromosomes. So that was a bit of a rush through some of the historical moments of the garden. And this year we've been doing our best to celebrate 400 years since the foundation of the garden during a pandemic. And we've managed to pull off a few important small events during this year. We'll have more next year when it's safer to do so. And one of our first visits to the garden, VIP visits, came with the G7 health ministers visit in June, when they held a conference here in Oxford discussing the vaccination programme across the world and vaccines generally. And they came to the Botanic Garden to acknowledge its foundation as a physic garden 400 years ago, and each planted a Japanese cherry tree in memory of those that had died during the pandemic. And ironically, this got the Botanic Garden the first ever, I don't know of any other Botanic Garden that is featured on the cover of our famous, most popular satirical magazine, The Private Eye. Then we had some other important visits. Not long after the G7 health ministers, we had a visit from His Royal Highness Prince Charles, Prince of Wales, who is the patron of the Botanic Garden and the Friends of the Oxford Botanic Garden. And he came along, and like the health ministers, he also planted a tree. He planted a black pine, which is a descendant of the famous tree that grew in the garden between 1830 and 2014, when it split down the middle and had to be removed for safety reasons. And he was delighted to plant this offspring of that famous tree because it was so loved by J.R.R. Tolkien, the author of Lord of the Rings, and he got great inspiration from that tree. So it was a fitting one for His Royal Highness to plant. Then on the actual day of the founding, July 25th, we had a visit from the Chancellor of Oxford University, Lord Patten of Barnes, who was guest of honour in a small group of 50 or so people celebrating the founding day. And at the same event, we launched a very special new hybrid rose to celebrate the 400th anniversary, the Oxford Physic Rose, which is one of the legacies of the 400th, along with a number of other things that we've created to mark the 400th, so that we have not just celebrations, but lasting legacies. These include new poetry from the Professor of Poetry, Alice Oswald, here at Oxford, some new compositions by the Oxford Leader Festival in a song cycle that commemorates the garden and is inspired by the garden. And we have even a celebration whiskey created with local distillers, the Oxford Artisan Distillery. And that's where we are in 2021. We're celebrating 400 years, and we've got a year of celebrations planned, which this wonderful symposium today is part of that year of celebrations. And we're also looking forward to the future, and we have some very ambitious plans for redevelopment at the garden and at the Arboretum. We desperately need new glass houses to replace the glass houses we currently have that are not really fit for purpose, and certainly don't have a carbon footprint that any botanic garden should be proud of. And we hope that we can create a new glasshouse experience here in the centre of Oxford, a tropical rainforest in the centre of Oxford, where we'll be able to grow incredibly exotic plants, particularly parasitic plants. And our expert in growing parasitic plants, Deputy Director Chris Thorogood, who you'll be hearing from in this symposium, has grand ambitions to grow Rafflesia, the largest flower of any plant, which of course is a parasitic plant, and maybe our new glasshouses will give that opportunity. We also have plans to create a visitor and learning centre at the Arboretum, our sister site at Newnham Courtney, just outside of Oxford, and we're awaiting the result of an application to the National Lottery Heritage Fund to help fund that important addition to that wonderful sister site of 100 40 acres of wonderful woodland and pinetum. As we move towards 2022, we will be looking to renew our strategy for the Botanic Garden, and currently our core strategies chime to some extent with the four sessions of this symposium, and our strategies have focused on research, education and engagement, conservation and visitor experience, all bundled up within hard science and science messaging within our interpretation and all the work that we do. And our motto, our mission motto, is sharing the scientific wonder and importance of plants with the world. So I'll just finish by saying a little more about what we mean by sharing the scientific wonder and importance of plants with the world. This wonder of plants is something I experienced as a young child when I saw my first bee orchid. And like the poet Langhorne, who wrote, "I sought the living bee to find and found the picture of a bee," I marveled at the beauty of this little floral recreation of a bee and wondered how on earth this could have come to be, if you pardon the sort of pun. There's so much wonder wrapped up in that image, that flower: evolution, pollination biology, ecology, developmental biology, developmental genetics. It's extraordinary to think that evolution molded such a flower. And during the course of this symposium, we'll be hearing more marvels of the botanical world. So I'll end by saying, let the wonder begin.